right, I want to talk about the ego. I just had a discussion with somebody in the gym, and we were talking about a lot of things, but we ended up talking about fighting. It went from just one thing to another. We ended up talking about fighting, and that opened up an opportunity for me to talk more about the ego. And he was saying that just like how I am, he used to be, not like this much anymore. Same with me, used to be. Now that I'm learning more about the ego and things like that, and evolving more towards my higher self and understanding the ego more, I'm not so much like that. But we were talking about if somebody fucking running their mouth, they're popping off, we're quick to jump up and confront them, talk shit back to them, fight them. And it's why do we do that? For one, I think we're conditioned as men to believe that we have to stand up, and not stand up for yourself, but stand up to somebody if they're just talking shit, they're just running their mouth. We're conditioned as men to believe that to be a man, we got to step up and fight them. That's just what we're supposed to do to be a man. And that has been driven into our minds so much. And of course, some of that has evolved from the ego. But if you think about how the ego started as a means of survival. The ego evolved as a means to survival. It evolved to survive through a hierarchy, to develop a hierarchy where the ego wanted to strive to be better than the next person. And that was necessary coming up tens of thousands of years ago. But now, is that so necessary? Now that we're learning more about the ego, when you're walking down the street and somebody pops off to you, if nobody's around, say you're walking down the street and somebody fucking pops off to you, and you turn around, you need to step up to them. If nobody's around, who do you feel the need to prove anything to? You feel the need to prove anything to that person? That person's making you feel inferior, maybe? It's the ego. It's the ego feeling insecure. The ego is feeling, oh, I got to show this person what's up. I got to show myself what's up. So you're willing to risk something happening. You're willing to risk either losing your life or possibly taking someone else's life and going away because of the ego. Now, I was telling the guy now, I was like, you know what, it used to be like that. And I asked him, I was like, when somebody pops off to you, that is your ego stepping in and saying you have to come up, you have to come back and show yourself. You have to show everyone that you're a man, that you have to try to prove that you're a man. And I told him, I said, now that I understand the ego, I don't live life for myself. I don't live life for the ego. We shouldn't be living life for the ego. I told him now, I said, if somebody pops off to me, somebody runs their mouth to me, I hear it, I immediately think, this is the ego observing. I want to react. I don't want to react. My true self doesn't want to react. The ego is taking over. The ego is observing what's being said, and it's saying, well, we have to step in and we have to face this guy. We have to fight this guy and prove ourselves. The ego is not real. As I was saying before, the ego evolved as a means for us to survive. The ego is a made-up thing. The ego is a made-up entity in our minds that creates this identity that we feel we have to protect, but it's not real. So I asked him, I'm like, are you willing to be walking down the street, have somebody pop off to you, you step in, not necessarily defending yourself, but defending your ego. You hit him, he falls, hits his head, goes into a coma, and dies a week later. Now you're looking at fucking 25 years to life. I said, because you had to protect this fake identity, that's something that's not real, made up. And he thought about it just like I think about it, just like I thought about it. Never thought about it like that before. And this is something that everyone needs to think about. I told him, I said, you know what? I said, man, I suffered with lots of depression. It was bad. I suffered with lots of depression that was based off of my insecurities. I was extremely insecure about a lot of things. I said, and it caused me to suffer a lot of depression. Now, before, I wouldn't have even said that to somebody. I wouldn't even spoke about that with somebody, let alone some guy that I don't know. I wouldn't talk about to a guy, and definitely not to a guy that I don't know. Right? Because I protect my ego. Because I got to protect my ego as a quote-unquote man and be manly. But again, that's the ego talk, and that's this made-up false image that's created that isn't real. What is real is your true self. What is real is your conscience. Your conscious, as I said before, your conscious is the authentic voice of God. It's a message from your higher self. It's guidance from your higher self. It's guidance from the universe or the creator or whatever you want to call it. That is real. I asked him, I said, when you step up to people like that, when somebody pops off and you step up to them, I said, does your conscious come in? He goes, well, back then in my younger days, no. He said, but now it does. I said, yes, exactly. I said, because as you've gotten older, your conscious is not as buried by the ego because you're getting older and you're understanding the ego more, not knowing it. You don't realize that you're understanding the ego more, but you are. Now your conscious comes more into play. You should be listening to your conscious. We should all be listening to our conscious because, as I said, that's the authentic voice of God. That's what we need to listen to, not the ego. Whenever I have these depressive, insecure thoughts, I think about what's observing this thought. Is my true self observing this thought, or is the ego observing this thought? And always, if it's negative, if it's giving me, if it's an insecure feeling or a depressed feeling, it is always the ego that is observing that thought. And then I tell myself, the ego is not real. This feeling that I'm having is not real because the ego is trying to convince me that I need to feel this way.